Today is Tuesday, September 26, 2017. This is our regular meeting. Good morning, Mr. Rickoff.
Good morning, sir.
First item on the agenda is adjustments to the agenda. Do you have any adjustments to the agenda?
Chair Farr, we have none.
To the board, any adjustments to the agenda? No? Then we have a relatively short regular business meeting this morning, to be followed by an executive session. Moving along then to public comments. We'll open the public comment period. Speakers will be taken in the order in which they sign up and limited to a 3-minute public comment section. At the conclusion of the 3 minutes, you'll hear a signal. When you step to the microphone, please state your name and address for the purposes of record. The first speaker today is William Ivanoff, followed by Jerry Settlemyer. Good morning. And I'll remind speakers, if you do have any written material, please present it to Mr. Rickoff and he will distribute it to the board or place it in the record.
It'd be easier to use a visual aid.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. Hello, my name is William Ivanoff. I live at 1560 Lincoln Street, Eugene, Oregon, and I've come here to speak about the new courthouse. I've seen a number of articles in the Register Guard about the issue of deeds, and I think that what you might see in front of you, I took this image from Google Maps this morning and use a little Microsoft Paint to do this. And this is a way that if you were to build a courthouse about four stories tall, close up those streets that were cut through the original place or the original public square, we could get back a public square in its entirety. We would have middle lane for buses to go through and emergency vehicles to pass through. We would have the public square that Eugene wants a public square for like 2023, I believe, when there's like some sporting event happening. And then a county courthouse to cap it off. You would have plenty of light. You would have the judge gets to have views of the park blocks. And it kind of brings everyone back to understanding that the park blocks or the original public square that Eugene Skinner had deeded to the county and to the city, that, and also Eternal Mulligan, would be a whole again and also be the town square rather than Kesey Square and Broadway Plaza, whatever they want to call it. And on the back side is, at the top is the 240,034 square feet. That was in one of your handouts a few months back as to about how large or how much square footage you need for the new courthouse. And so if you look at it, I did square footage based on the variable lots in that space. And depending on how how far you go south from that alleyway, you can figure out how much you need to build for like a fourth floor, and you can have that fourth floor kind of inset a little bit, so that way you can have solar able to get to the buildings on the north side of 7th Avenue. So basically, this is just a way to show that this is another option. And I did speak with engineering for the city, and they said that it is possible to close up those streets.
Thank you, Mr. Ivanoff, and thank you for the drawing, oh, excuse me, the diagram. It will be placed in the public record along with your testimony. Thank you. Next is Jerry Settlemyer, followed by Beth Poole.
One of my goals today is to beat the bell. Jerry Settlemyer, 78578 Cedar Park Road. We're back. Thanks for listening. We didn't mean to leave early last time. Sorry we missed the notes, but we have been brought up to speed on some information about your October 31st meeting, and we look forward to finding out how we might participate or contribute or something in that. I'm here about Cedar Park Road and the livability of it. Judy and Don Violet have lived on Cedar Park Road for more than 50 years. They didn't move into Cedar Park Road 50 years ago to live beside the freeway or noise that's similar to the freeway. Across the road from them about a month ago, in moved a really huge generator. Now, the decibels of that generator do not cause hearing loss if you're directly exposed to it. But if you can imagine your bedroom with the diesel log truck running outside all night long, that's about how loud it is. It is very nerving to them. Don had a stroke a number of years back. He now deals with up to 23 additional cars passing him as he does his daily walk up and down Cedar Park Road. He's pretty nervous about that too. The generator was supposed to, according to one of the officials of One Bro operation, Judy was told the generator would operate for the longest of 2.5 days at a time, and then it would be off. In that more than a month, it's only been off 1 day and 1 night. Another neighbor, one plot over from one of the big grows, has a well drilling rig in it right now. They figure they're going to have to go down about 300 feet to get water because their water has disappeared. It's the season. About a third of the crop has been harvested. So a little bit less stench is occurring on a daily basis. That happens in the evening if you ever want to drive up to get a good whiff. It's when the weather kind of comes down and it keeps it down low. I'm just wondering if you can give me some direction on how we might want to consider changing the name of our road. I don't know if there's a code or something like that. There must be a department. But we thought about putting this up at the end of our road just to see what kind of neighborhood support we'd get. And it'll be seasonal. We can take it down, during the winter when things aren't growing.
Thank you, Mr. Settlemyer.
Thank you.
Next is Beth Poole, followed by Richard Sedlock. Mr. Rickoff, I'll remind you that we do have a policy regarding sign holding in Harris Hall during testimony. However, I viewed that as a part of the testimony as opposed to a demonstration from the audience. So I didn't make a comment on it during the testimony.
Thank you.
Beth Poole, followed by Richard Sedlock.
Hi, I'm Beth Poole, 78628 Cedar Park Road, Cottage Grove. I first want to start with a sincere appreciation for the personal connections that the commissioners have been making and giving us hope, something to look forward to in the light of pretty more than frustrating situation. So I'm here with two things today, an update and some cautions, and then maybe some suggestions that you might want to consider in preparing for the work session coming up on Halloween. So our situation is specific, but I think some of the examples, the updates that I'm going to give, can be applied anywhere, and that's why I think they're relevant to share. We learned Thursday was a pretty devastating day for us. We learned that the specific site on Cedar Park, we learned that they are legal. Everything they've been doing is legal as far as state goes. The number of plants, the processing structure that's on the site. Let's see. Prior to that, timing doesn't matter, but another example that is specific to our site, but again can happen throughout the county, it was suggested to a neighbor that the neighbor request a rezoning of their parcel from RR to F1. Be patient, it'll take about a year, and then I'll buy your property to F1, from RR to F1, F2. This is the thinking that's going on. Just I want to put that out there. Thursday was devastating after in addition to the legal procedures, Department of Environmental Quality, I had a conversation about the potential chemical runoff from the sloped site into a ditch. The ditch feeds into Row River, which is a source of drinking water. DEQ basically told me that we'd have to catch any chemical use, we'd have to catch via photograph the chemicals they're using and the application. Those are the only two things that DEQ, is what I was told on Thursday, could then come in to pursue a complaint. This situation then brings me to some suggestions. With the possibility of land use management in the county in these F1, F2 lots, is it possible to require plantings be put on the borders? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Poole. I'll remind you, you can finish a sentence, so.
Can I make a 100-word sentence out of this? That plantings be required on the borders that mitigate chemical runoff, and there was a comma there, and require tall plantings that would create a wind block that could be a buffer for odor coming off of the plants.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Richard Sedlock is the last person we have signed up today.
Richard Sedlock, 78628 Cedar Park Road. Hey, you guys. And I'd like to publicly apologize for the mistakes I made last week about the grievances and apparent violations that Wingrove was involved with. If the OLCC guy had called us instead of emailing us while we were waiting in the back of the room, I wouldn't have had that egg on my face that I contacted you about right afterwards. The RR5 purported violation was totally a brain fart by me. But the issue about that I concerned about exceeding the 40,000 square foot canopy per tax lot actually would have been a valid concern with an earlier version of the laws. So this time 2 years ago, or November of 2015, that was actually on the books. Apparently, it wasn't finalized yet. So it is legal for Wingrove to, or anybody anywhere, to grow 40,000 square feet outdoors, and another 40,000 square feet, as long as it's separated by 8 feet, and then another 40,000 square feet separated by 8 feet. So there's really no limit on how many plants or how much biomass marijuana growing could happen on a tax lot, except for the size of the tax lot, plus the minimal 100-foot setback. And when you have so many plants on a small lot, on a large lot, the 100-foot setback does nothing to control the stench that affects everyone around there. And so we'd like to, I mean, there are a lot of, the county, because you guys actually, not you guys, the county has control over land use. There are two ways that we can think of, and probably more. We're not experts in governance by any means. To reduce the effects on neighborhoods like ours so they don't get so heavily impacted in so many ways. First is just to prohibit growing marijuana on F2 lots. Those F2 is what mantles all our zones in the county. I've spent a lot of time with the county zoning map now. And there are many, many neighbors like us on our properties that face this same sort of thing. A second possibility is to increase the setback dramatically to 1,000 feet minimum or more, which we realize would mean it couldn't be grown, marijuana couldn't be grown on a lot of the F2 lots, which is fine. And both of these, I mean, it's stuff we'll talk about on October 31st, but neither of these would actually require much additional staff work by anybody in the county. An LUCS would still need to be submitted, and presumably a map would have to accompany their plot and show that they're not within 1,000 feet of an adjacent property line. Anyway, this is an issue that doesn't just affect us. I mean, we're the ones who've been coming here and you might be tired of us by now, but there are so many other neighbors that we've heard from who are in a similar situation and just abhor the possibility of this happening to them. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sedlock. Mr. Sedlock was the last registered speaker this morning. If anyone else in the room today would wish to address the Board of County Commissioners, you can do so at this time. I see no one. We'll move along to item 3, which is Commissioners' response to public comments and or other issues and remonstrances. Just a brief explanation of what this means. Commissioners now have a chance to respond either to the testimony this morning or to make other comments or announcements. We do have a period later on in the meeting where commissioners have an opportunity to talk about commissioner business. This is an opportunity for commissioners to speak on the record. Commissioners. I see none other than me. So I just wanted to mention one thing. And I have in my hand, it's an announcement by NAMI. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness for Lane County, mental health support for seniors. And we don't think often about retired folks and mental health issues that accompany post-retirement and issues that may occur, sometimes different from issues that occur during people's working years. And things can be a little bit strange to folks going on around. And I have a little bit of a story to explain what I mean by that. Yesterday, my son, one of my sons called me and said that they had an incident in their house where they got home from, they're both teachers, professors in a college, they got home from work. And their door, there was clearly somebody had been in their house. Their front yard was disturbed. There was stuff on their porch. And they could see what looked like movement in one of their upstairs bedrooms. Well, they called the police. The police came, and in fact, there was a naked woman in their house in one of the upstairs bedrooms, which draws a smile. You know, it draws a smile. Oh, a naked person, that's kind of funny. Well, in fact, you know, what causes someone to be intruding in someone's house? Well, upon discussion, they called the police, and they found out that this woman believed that it was the residence of Dickie Finnegan, a friend of hers. And the reason she had no clothes on, well, she was doing laundry. And she'd moved some of their things around, packed a couple of bags, taken the ice cream upstairs, taken a bath in their home. Now, all elicits a smile when you think about the actual circumstances, but really, what happened next is what made me pause and think pretty significantly. The police came and they said, well, we can, if you want to, we can consider this aggravated trespass. We'll book her into the jail. Well, my son didn't want that. And so he talked to me and asked me for what I would have done in the situation, and I listened to what he did, and what he did was the appropriate thing. This woman clearly was not going to be served by being taken to jail. Clearly, she had some form of delusion that caused her to trespass which was in fact trespass, some form of delusion that caused her to think that this was a place that she could take a bath and that she could move stuff around. And in fact, my son insisted that she be taken someplace where she could receive treatment rather than jail. The police in the city that they live in were interested in taking her to jail. Now, I'm pleased to say that that our sheriff's department and, in fact, the municipal police departments in our area are more inclined to try to find some behavioral health support for people who are clearly delusional or clearly exhibiting behavior that goes beyond going to jail. Because what would jail have done? What would have writing her what would have been yet another trespass ticket? What would it have done for her today and significantly for the future? And what would it have done for public safety in the future? It would have done nothing. In fact, it would have aggravated it. So the NAMI announcement that I received this morning regarding mental health support for seniors, it's not just seniors that we need to support in mental health, but particularly seniors. And I'm going to attend this and learn from what I hear from NAMI, because this is what they do. That's what they study. And in fact, I believe that as a county and as cities in our county, we do a pretty decent job of trying to avoid jail for people who should instead be in treatment, something we need to continue to focus on, need to continue to put resources into. And the fact that passing the jail levy helped us to put behavioral health specialists in the Lane County Jail to avoid jail time for people who need treatment time is a step in the right direction. One of many steps that we need to take in that direction. Thank you. And for the folks testifying today, thank you for your continued information. With no more response to public comments or other issues and remonstrances, Mr. Rickoff, do we have any emergency business today?
No, sir, we do not.
No emergency business from the board? I see none. We'll move along to our consent calendar, item 5. All items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the Board of Commissioners and will be enacted by a single motion in the form listed on our agenda. So we have before us a consent calendar. Do I have a motion? Commissioner Bozievich.
So I'll move approval of the September 26, 2017 consent calendar.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozievich, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Discussion to the motion. I will note that if you for those of you watching online or at home, if you click on View Material on today's agenda, it will give you full information regarding the items we are acting on this morning. So with no further discussion, I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving along to item 6, which is County Council, and today we have Mr. Rickoff, Mr. Dingle.
Good morning, Chair Farr, members of the Board of Commission. You'll recall that last week I made a presentation on in response to a request for information from Commissioner Sorensen regarding a residential excise tax and a commercial excise tax. And I think pretty much completed the presentation. And what happened is we had Travel Lane County had a time certain, and I didn't quite finish and end up with direction from the board as to what the next step would be. And so if you look at the my board memo dated September 12, 2017, essentially we presented 3 alternatives, which would be to continue. And this would be, I think, picking up on a suggestion that was made by Commissioner Lycan that some interested parties be notified. So continue discussion and schedule a work session. The other possibility would be to direct staff to draft an ordinance with either residential and or a commercial excise tax, or take no action. So essentially I'm just back here today looking for direction from the board as to what the next steps are in this particular issue.
Thank you for the continuation, Ms. Dingle, because you were truncated in your last presentation on this item by a 10 o'clock time certain. So discussion questions from the board? Commissioner Bozievich.
If I remember, towards the end of the last board meeting under agenda team requests, we did bring this up, and I think there was head nods to having it come back as a future work session.
Okay.
Your option 1, I guess.
Okay. And following up on the suggestion by Commissioner Lycan, I believe you mentioned real estate, representative of real estate and a representative
The Home Builders Association.
Okay.
And those involved with commercial real estate in particular is, and probably, I don't think I mentioned residential real estate, did I? Or is that something worth?
I think it makes sense if you're going to do, I think you want to cover both. I assume you want
Yeah.
information on both types. Remember, there's
Yeah.
the residential, and then there's the potential commercial. So I would have tried to notify folks from both.
Yeah, I would agree. And the reason why I brought that up is because members of both the local real estate associations and the homebuilders associations were unaware that we were discussing this item. And I thought it would be fruitful to make sure that they are aware and where it goes. It may end up not going anywhere, but I did agree that, and I do agree, I think we all agreed we should have additional work session and to kind of clarify some of the information that's available on what this means.
And thank you. That's very helpful. And I wondered if there was, the other thing is if you had a time in mind as to when you'd like to,
Very well.
within a certain period of time, you'd like to have it come back.
Thank you, Commissioner Lycan. Commissioner Sorensen.
As to the first question you just asked, I would just opine that, this should be referred to the board chair and county administrator to come up with a plan on when we would do this. And I don't think there's any, urgency. I don't think it should be done too quickly. I think that the necessary parties within the county government, such as the assessor and the tax people, but also the people that would have concerns, I won't say opposed, but they'll have concerns, such as the home builders of Lane County, such as the Eugene Realtors. Those two groups come to mind. And regarding the other side of this whole thing, namely there are possible opponents, people that are concerned about it from a I'm concerned, i.e. I don't want it, or people that are concerned, i.e. why haven't you done it? I think I would balance the group or people that would be invited to such a thing, work session, to include the advocates for affordable housing, the advocates for the homeless, the people in the communities that have already adopted this that were in favor of adopting it. And again, they probably have concerns too on how much money would be raised and where it would be spent, and they'd like to give their perspective on this as well. So I would just say that I'm looking for a presentation or a group discussion that would give as many voices that we would want, we, the 5 commissioners, would want to know what the perspectives of these groups and individuals would be. And then last but not least, if, and this is an if, not a what I would call a mandatory request, but a concern, and that would be that we have colleagues in Tillamook County and Hood River County specifically, and we have obviously city colleagues as well, but we have colleagues in these other communities that have already adopted this, and they had the pros and cons of adopting it and the different levels and the different types of property. So there's a lot of complexity to this. And if we could get a phone hookup with 1 or 2 of these people who played a role in adopting it, I think their perspective would be good. I know Tillamook County has more of what I would call a traditional county government, 3 commissioners at large, where Hood River County is much more like a city. They have 5 commissioners, each with tiny districts, and an active county administrator, more or less like a city administrator. So the communities, the governments in the 2 communities are different, but I think everybody here would like to hear what the commissioners, what their concerns were, because they really faced it when they adopted these things. So those are just some ideas.
Do you have it's pretty easy with the other ones, because there is an existing, home builders association, the real estate thing. Do you have, in terms of those other groups, do you have a specific group in mind?
Well, there's certainly the CALC, C-A-L-C. They've had Michael Kerrigan has appeared here in public comment on behalf of CALC. That's been one group. What's Reverend Martin's name? Wayne Martin.
Yeah.
Wayne Martin, who is a retired minister and he's appeared at public comment. And I don't know what the name of his group is, but he has that.
He's associated with Nightingale, yes.
Nightingale would be an example, and maybe some policy people with HACSA that are working on, and what is it called, Metro Affordable Housing? Metro for Affordable Housing is another group that is not really into the homeless issue so much as they're into affordable housing, but they're a nonprofit group that has partnered with HACSA and has an executive director whose name I don't know, but those are several groups on the, let's say, the pro side. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen, and we can also...
Dan Bryant, Reverend Dan Bryant, is a minister and former president of the City Club of Eugene, and he's been involved in helping on affordable and homeless housing issues. So these are the kind of people that probably would want us to do, I'm assuming they would probably want us to do this. And I agree with Commissioner Lycan that the people who would have to increase the price of their house to pay the tax would also be a very important group to hear from.
Thank you. Before I ask for further comments, we're seeming to have concurrence from the board regarding the work session, and sometime prior to it coming to the agenda team, perhaps we can brainstorm a little bit as to what the agenda item would look like that comes to the agenda team. So further comments? Okay, very well. It looks, once again, seems to be concurrence from the board to have a discussion on this. There are some ideas and some misconceptions regarding what excise tax might involve and the amount that it can be that can be raised. I think looking at Tillamook's version and the counselor there, we went to different schools together in Tillamook City. He went to Tillamook Catholic High School. I went to Tillamook High School. As Bill Bartline, who worked the effort in Tillamook County. So plenty to talk about, and Commissioner Sorensen said no urgency as far as the time frame is concerned. I think the only urgency is just getting a fairly good body of information together for the commissioners to act on. So thank you, Mr. Dingell, for bringing that up. Any further announcements?
No, nothing further from County Council.
Thank you very much. Then we will move along to county administration. And Mr. Mokrahajski is excused absent today.
Thank you. He'll be pleased to hear that. Chair Farr, Commissioners, County Administrator Steve Mokrahajski continues at his County Finance Conference. He will be back in the office on Friday. I'm looking forward to that. Just a couple quick announcements. I will save any conversation on the Lane County Performance Audit Committee, thinking that I might supplement your comments if you desire as we talk about that. Also with the Public Safety Coordinating Council Budget Committee that occurred on Friday. Commissioner Bosevich, if I can assist in your comments, I'd be pleased to do that. I did want to let you know that really for the first time in recent memory, we did have 2 work units participate in United Way's Day of Caring. It's not something that the county has done a great deal of in the past, but we did have the county administration office. We went over to Ross Lane Affordable Housing with St. Vincent de Paul and spent the morning spreading mulch and helping to beautify the buildings there. It was a very worthwhile endeavor and a great team building opportunity for CAO. The financial services had the chance to go to the Oregon Social Learning Center and put together the KITS programs with about 30 other individuals and had a great day learning about kids in transition to schools, the remarkable work they do, and their reliance on volunteers to be able to do it. So I look forward to us continuing to build on our participation with United Way Day of Caring, and we will make sure the invitations are extended to the commissioners. So if you'd like to come out and shovel mulch or other things with us, you're certainly invited. I would like you to save, and you'll be hearing more about this, we are setting the dates for the Human Resources Director position, and it looks like you'll be receiving an invitation for October 19th. likely at noon, and likely to be a similar format that we used with the Health and Human Services Director, which would be a lunchtime gathering and a chance to meet all the candidates. But you will receive a more formal invitation regarding that. I know the topic of the law librarian has come up. We do have a candidate in background in review at this point. It would be premature to mention the individual's name, but do welcome Jessica Sakharov, who is a law student, actually a graduate of the U of O Law School, is sitting and waiting for her bar results. So if you hear hooting and hollering coming from the law library, go in and celebrate with her. But as you pass the door, do welcome and thank her for her participation. With that, I think we're ready to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Rakoff. I will mention that the board has selected me to be the representative on the Performance Audit Committee, and Human Resource met with the committee last week to give the outline regarding the direction that we're going in filling the performance auditor position. I'll give a report on that during Commissioner's business toward the end of this morning's regular meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any response or questions for Mr. Rakoff? Then we'll move directly along to item 7B, which is Order 1709-2605, in the matter of approving project awards under Title III of Secure Rural Schools and Community Self-Determination Program under Public Law 114-10. And today, Mr. Rakoff, we have Christine Moody. Good morning, Ms. Moody.
Thank you, Chair Farr, Commissioners. So as you already mentioned, this is Title III funding. This is the last public law where they authorized secure rural schools back in 2015. We had carryover from the prior Title III funding, so that's why you're just hearing about this now. We were spending that money first. So the board needs to, if they want to add any projects to this Title III funding, initiate those before September 30th, in a few days here. So we put out a required 45-day notice asking for comments and if there were any other projects, and received one from the Sheriff's Office to add search and rescue back into the Title III funding. So they were, some of you may remember, using some old funding that we had received back in 2000. It's the, has the least restrictions on it, has no date that it has to be turned back over to the Treasury. So that's why we've spent that money slowest. So we still have some of that, but they have the opportunity to now use this newer funding first in order to supplement search and rescue for the next 3 years. So the other project that you have that you've been funding is the Firewise Communities Program in land management. And as the memo shows, you would have funding to do both of those projects, the 3 years that the Sheriff's Office has requested, and then 2 to 3 years for Firewise. That one's really dependent on how many requests we get from grants from the community. So it's hard to say exactly how long that funding would last for them.
Thank you, Ms. Moody. I see the search and rescue, we're looking for at around $308,000 for search and rescue, and Firewise anywhere from $890 to $1.2 million annually, depending on the need and the calls.
Correct.
And I'd like to say that this is another example of Lane County being very deliberative in spending what is essentially one-time money, and not just immediately, buying a new house. Taking care to allocate the money judiciously. So thank you very much for bringing this forward today. From the board, questions or comments? I see none. Then we do have before us, it's Board Order 1709-26-05. Do I have a motion? Commissioner Bozievich.
I'll move approval of Order 1709-2605 in the matter of approving project awards under Title III of the Secure Rural Schools and Community Self-Determination Program under Public Law 114-10.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozievich, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Discussion to the motion. I see none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Moody.
I wonder if we'll get a lot of Firewise applications from Mackenzie Bridge.
It may push closer to 1.2, I think, than 0.89. So then we'll move along to item. My gosh, and not just Mackenzie Bridge, but up the Willamette also.
Yeah, Fall Creek and
Fall Creek.
Jones Fire.
Jones, yeah.
Been a pretty robust fire season. Then we'll move along to item 7C, Mr. Rickoff, which is an action item, Legislative Committee post-session debrief and action, correspondence to the federal delegation. Today we have Mr. Alex Kyler. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. You have a packet in front of you that I've prepared. This is a report back from the Legislative Committee meeting of August 24th. And mostly at that meeting, we dealt with issues related to wrap-up of the 2017 legislative session. And we also addressed a few things moving forward with respect to the 2018 session and a few things related to our federal advocacy work. In the in-between time, in fact, immediately after the meeting, there were a couple of issues that arose with respect to correspondence. And so if okay with you, I'm just going to go in the order that I've prepared the packet. So we've got 3 letters that I've prepared. And I'm going to take the first one, which is actually a letter that's already been sent on behalf of the United Front Partners. And this came in just immediately after our legislative committee. Because tax reform, and particularly the treatment of municipal bonds, has been an issue for the United Front Partners for many years, I'm including this as a sort of a fait accompli, if you will, but I wanted the board to be able to see that the United Front partners are continuing to advocate for things that they're anticipating are coming in Congress. And so one of the issues here was that we were beginning to see that the emphasis was shifting towards a conversation around tax reform. And essentially what this letter does is address a number of key points for, in particular, Senator Merkley. Senator Merkley, as you know, sits on the Appropriations Committee, and we've long targeted him for issues around fiscal management and tax issues. So the letter essentially goes over a couple of different existing laws with respect to tax exemption of fiscal tools that we utilize, and the gist of it is to urge the senator to understand that these are important tools to local government and to try to preserve them through this coming conversation on tax reform. And again, this letter has already been sent, but I thought it was important to put into the packet as an issue to alert you to, particularly Chair Farr, because your signature's on it.
It is indeed. And I notice there's a signature missing. Did that signature subsequently get added? It's just
I don't know why
looking at.
Tina's did not get on there, but I guess it's up. It's just up a little bit from the block. The next letter is one that is a little bit more complex. I'm going to bring your attention to not only attachment B, which is a draft letter to Congressman DeFazio, but also attachment F, I believe it is, which is a letter, an advocacy letter from a rail group, a national advocacy group called Go Rail. Go Rail does work with a variety of freight rail interests, and we've actually worked with them in the past and signed on to a couple of the things that they've been pressing for. And so I was very willing to take a meeting with their most recent individual who serves Washington, Oregon, and California issues, and he let me know of this letter that they are working on to try to get folks to sign on to in attachment F, and it's a letter to leadership of both the House and Senate Transportation Committees. At issue for them is a rulemaking that has been was immediately frozen by the Trump administration, but is now back on track. The rulemaking was by the National Surface Transportation Board. And at issue is the practice of what they call reciprocal switching. So reciprocal switching is where you might have a user, a shipper of freight rail goods that has no choice with respect to what railroad they are served by. And so reciprocal switching would allow for a competitor, for example, of the rail line that they're on to actually access that rail line, go pick up goods. That's one part of reciprocal switching. Another part is where the owner of the rail line would deliver the goods to a competitor's rail line and make a seamless sort of transfer to that competitor. And the billing, for example, would not reflect any difference. It would just be as if the secondary rail line, if you will, had come to the shipper and picked up the stuff and moved on. So it's been a contentious issue because the Surface Transportation Board is prohibited from setting actual freight rail rates. And so there are the shippers have brought forward advocacy to the Surface Transportation Board to do this reciprocal switching rule. The Class 1 rail lines in particularly don't really like that idea. They can do this voluntarily already, and they in some cases do it voluntarily. There is a mechanism to the Surface Transportation Board where a shipper who feels particularly aggrieved can come and make their case to the Surface Transportation Board as a regulatory body that they've been ill-served. It doesn't happen very often, but it is a tool. And so there's sort of a big debate going on, and they asked us to weigh in. I reviewed their letter and found it sort of confusing because it didn't really say much. It sort of complained about the Surface Transportation Board, but wasn't sort of a normal advocacy letter of we urge you to support HR such and such or Senate such and such. And so, and started talking to other people about it, including the Port of Coos Bay. They don't like the letter, in fact. They refuse to sign on. And so now I'm beginning to think, well, this is an interesting thing where we've tried to support Go Rail in the past. We've certainly tried to be supportive of our partners out at the Coos Bay, the Port of Coos Bay. And I frankly wasn't all that impressed with the letter in Attachment F because I felt like it really wasn't a very concrete ask. So instead I drafted Attachment B, which I was trying to sort of thread a needle to suggest that you don't sign on to the Go Rail letter, but that we send this letter instead. And this letter ended up sounding a little bit like Go Rail's letter, which is that we don't like the sound of the Go Rail letter, but there clearly is an issue here, and we sort of think that it has to do with the administrative authority of the Surface Transportation Board versus the legislative authority of Congress. And then once I got a little bit more feedback, I just went back to our legislative principles document, and I landed on this particular sentence in our legislative principles and priorities document, which is legislative priorities shall address issues directly relevant to or impacting the provision of county services. So while this is a very interesting issue, and I think one that's worth tracking, at this point in time I'm not really finding it very ripe for the county because I'm finding a tough time finding the actual impact to county services. And the advice that I got was that we actually just stay away from the issue.
Right on. Okay, and I believe Commissioner Lycan may have a question or a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Alex, on this particular piece, I think I kind of agree with you on this, but at the same time, Have you had a chance to maybe talk to Dan Whalen and maybe get his thought on this? Because the thing is Congressman DeFazio wanting a letter? First of all, I think that's the key. And if he's wanting a letter, especially with his position on transportation, period. I mean, as a ranking member of the full committee, you know, I would start there first to find out, because, and I look at this, not just the Port of Coos Bay, but remember that pinch point that there by Glenwood with UP to Corp. And Corp goes right by Goshen.
Yeah.
And north-south. So I think that's where I would start, instead of trying to draft a letter just because. I think it would make more sense to find out from Congressman DeFazio's office if a letter like this would be beneficial to him, having support of his largest county in his district, and moving forward, because rail obviously is something we want to work on and continue to be a partner in. So just thoughts there, and if you've had a chance to reach out, and if not, that's probably, I would suggest that's maybe where we start.
Chairman Farr and Commissioner Lycan, that's an excellent point. And in fact, we did reach out to, not to Dan, but to Liz Cooney, who's the minority staff person to the T&I committee, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And in fact, it was her advice that we stay away from this. I had looked, it was intriguing because I had looked at, there is some legislative history here where Congress has actually tried to do this kind of thing before. And it has never been a bill that has advanced. And in particular, looking back, I mean, I think I looked back to clear back to 2003. Congressman DeFazio has never been a sponsor of any of that legislation. And so I started to sort of go, yeah, he's clearly not taken much of a position on this, at least that I was aware of in a public way. And indeed, when we did reach out to Liz, her advice was, you know, you do have some issues that he is very much aware of in Lane County, particularly what we call a paper barrier issue. And reciprocal switching will not necessarily solve the paper barrier issue, is what I understand. So again, you know, I really tried to sort of find a way forward here, but ultimately the staff recommendation is we don't, that the board does not sign on to either the Go Rail letter or send this draft to Congressman DeFazio. But I think it is, again, I think it's worth, as Commissioner Lycan points out, we've been paying much more attention to freight rail issues, I think, over the last several years, and I think it's definitely one to keep on the radar screen and see how this evolves. But for the time being, I think the recommendation is we keep our powder dry and not weigh in on this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lycan. And follow up on that, it sounds as though you have been in contact with Congressman DeFazio's office already, and you've received input. And I like that approach before sending a letter to find out if it is a letter, not just this letter, but in general. Sure. Is it a letter that works well with the congressman or the senator's personal interest, and B, is it something that we can assist the we're always asking them to help. How can we help them? That's right. Anyway, do their work. So, Commissioner Sorensen, did I see your hand? No. Further questions or comments? Mr. Kyle, continue.
So I'm going to move on, Mr. Chair, to the final letter, which was is a letter of comment to the BLM, to the now no longer the Eugene district, and I'm sorry, I think it's now called the Commissioner Bozovich, you might have to help me out. It's like the North Coast District. At any rate, they combined the Eugene and Salem districts into one. And so we had gotten a letter from them because we have weighed in on various BLM resource management plans and other issues before. And so they had, they are about to do quite a bit of work down off of the, in the southern part of the county, really on both sides of Territorial Highway as it approaches Douglas County. A number of thinning projects. There's some environmentally sensitive areas down there that that have some oak, I think they call it oak prairie, that they're going to be working on as well. And so they were asking for comments, and I formatted this letter very similar to how we did the resource management plan, essentially suggesting that the board make certain findings. These are sort of statements of fact, if you will, as the board sees them around this issue, and then really just made two comments regarding the South Siuslaw project. And one was that obviously we were right in the, when I was drafting this letter, we were right in the middle of a very extreme fire season and smoke impacts, and so it just emphasized that fire prevention activities in that region. And then also touched on the sort of threat of sudden oak death to this region. Sudden oak death is an issue that really started in California and has now moved into Oregon, up into as far north as Coos County. And so while to my knowledge, nobody's found any in Lane County yet, it's quite alarming for the folks in Coos and Curry County with respect to what it's done to some of the BLM lands in California. So just touched on those two issues for the BLM, and this letter would be sent today just to provide comment to that issue. One of the findings I did want to also just bring to your attention was that they will be hauling logs out of that area, and I did talk to our road maintenance staff out at Public Works, and they're very involved in that process, and so we'll be aware of if there are certain hazard trees or those kinds of things along the roadway. They can address those through the permitting function that BLM will enter into with the county for hauling.
In case I missed this, I apologize, but whereabouts on the territorial highway is that? How far south of, for instance, the Lorraine Junction?
It's essentially immediately south of the Cottage Grove Lorraine Highway. Okay. So one of the areas actually is on both sides, north and south of the Cottage Grove Lorraine Highway, and then others are more a little bit south on territorial and more to the west.
Thank you. Questions or comments regarding that letter? Okay.
I think for this one, I would appreciate a motion just to formalize that you've seen it and we'll submit it.
Very good. So we have before us, it's listed as attachment C, addressed to the Siuslaw Field Office BLM. Do I have a motion? Commissioner Bozievich.
So I'll move approval. I'll move that the board authorize the chair to sign the letter to BLM on the South Siuslaw environmental assessment.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozievich, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Discussion to the motion? I see none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Mr. Kiley, you have your instructions regarding that.
Thank you.
Continue.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could take just a little bit of liberty here, because there is an issue related to territorial that I wanted to bring up while we've been discussing this. You may recall in 2014, the county did apply for a Tiger grant to improve the 5.7 mile stretch of territorial that starts at Cottage Grove Lorraine Highway and moves north up to Gillespie Corners.
Which received considerable local support, too.
A lot of local support, yes. We've actually, that notice of funding opportunity was for Tiger 2017 was released recently, and very short window to make that application. The due date for the grant's actually October 16th. We have, as staff, started to work on that application. So I'm working very closely with Public Works staff to resubmit. We're going to tweak that application a little bit. Obviously, the environment has changed a little bit, in particular with regard to funding because of the House Bill 2017. So typically, you know, the staff will come to the board with a packet to accept funding, and so you know, fingers crossed, we will be coming to you with that application once we learn more about the application. But
and
so
the
far,
deadline
things
again
are
is
gone
October
okay.
31st.
16th.
October 16th. That's a pretty rush deadline.
It's very short.
We can do it. We can do it.
We can't do it.
You can't do it.
Okay.
Sure. The other thing that one of the things we looked at as we made that decision about the application for Tiger, you recall, Commissioner Farr, we've been in Washington, D.C. Sometimes it gets a little dicey there if we have multiple people who are particularly interested in that program. We've done a pretty thorough job of checking with our partners here. Nobody else has a Tiger application in the works, and so we are the sole Tiger applicant, we believe, from Lane County.
In 2014, we kind of deferred to Springfield's application for the Glenwood project, I believe it was.
Sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, this is pretty exciting because, as you say, the landscape's changed a little bit, and we have some funding to bring to the table also. And I'm certain that we can garner the support from the local, the local interested parties. So excellent.
I'm working on it. Yep.
Good. You don't need a motion on that. That's
No.
just a work in progress. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to move on to the just a legislative wrap up. I did, in the analysis of your packet, give a little bit of a very broad overview about sort of budget issues that were addressed during the session. A little bit about how the volume of the bills that we dealt with during the session. I'm breaking out in a cold sweat just thinking about my time in Salem this year. But all in all, I think that, what I'd really love to address, to point your attention to is if you take a look at Attachment D, this should look fairly familiar to you. These were the legislative priorities we went into the session with. And, Lane County, and we've discussed it, I've heard the board discuss this a little bit in other venues, but we did very well. We really had a very good session, and so I'll just quickly run through things that I think you already know mostly, but county courthouse bonding, for example, we were successful there. We've got $5 million additional in the pipeline that won't be sold for almost 2 years, but it's in the pipeline and waiting for us when the state gets ready to sell those bonds. Transportation infrastructure, you guys have talked a lot about that already, but we did very well again there with particular projects, Territorial Highway, Highway 126 West, both received some funding, and the City of Eugene and City of Springfield also did fairly well with respect to individual projects within their cities. And then that's to say nothing of just the increased allocation from the State Highway Fund, which I think the average was $8.2 million over the next 10 years. In additional funding. So pretty significant transportation bill. There has been, and I have had, as recently as last week, I was in Salem for legislative days. My advice for the board, I think, is we're going to have to continue to advocate for Delta Beltline. While there is some additional money, there's some surplus money that's going to move over to that project that ODOT did not spend from the I-5 Beltline project. There's a little bit of funding that will move over to the Delta Beltline project. Obviously, the state's highway fund has grown as well as the local ones, and we've got some abilities to work within the normal planning process to direct funding to that project. But indeed, it was something that did get. When the discussion moved from congestion projects and a particular mechanism for congestion projects statewide got eliminated from the first version of the bill and did not make it into the final version of the bill, there was a blow that project did take. So I think it's something we've just got to keep on our radar screen in terms of advocacy.
And if I may, at this point in time, that's a project that's been on the radar screen for such a long time. I've been working on it since mid-1990s personally. But significantly, it's not just the intersection and the bridge over the Willamette River, but also the approaches to the intersection, particularly from the north. And as the city expands and adds residential land to the north, it becomes even more treacherous a situation for the people living along what is North Delta Highway is a very busy highway approaching that intersection, something we need to pay very close attention to. Thank you.
The next issue is justice reinvestment appropriations. As you recall, we went into the session with the governor's budget making significant cuts to both JRI and Community Corrections Act funding. We've got a really terrific advocacy group in Salem that worked on that issue week in and week out, just very methodically. Commissioner Bozovich made several trips to Salem and did yeoman's work on making sure that our delegation and indeed folks who sat on the Public Safety Subcommittee of Ways and Means really understood the importance of JRI and CCA funding. So that was actually a good story where current service level has been maintained, and we dodged that bullet, if you will. Junction City Hospital was another issue that we paid close attention to. The good news is, well, the governor's budget had zeroed out funding for Junction City Hospital and would have closed it. It maintained current service level through the legislatively approved budget. So while there's still it's not fully functional up there, at least it is still open. And there are a number of issues related to Junction City that we'll continue to keep our eyes on. Just again, as recently as last week in Salem, there was more talk about language that is used around civil commitments and how that language needs some updating. So there's a lot of focus on that particular issue, and I think we will see it continue to be a legislative priority and a legislative discussion as time goes on.
And it's particularly comforting to know that the senator from that district is really strong on the issue.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they did a very good job. So I don't need to spend too much more time on sort of the second tier and third tier issues. I would like to just note that I know even this morning you had discussion about marijuana issues. There should be a fairly significant influx of the state tax money that gets allocated to counties being delivered to Lane County any day now. We have not received dime one from what started out as Measure 91, the legalization of marijuana in Oregon. That money should begin to flow here by the end of the month, is what we have been told. So we're keeping a close eye on that, and conversation will continue around recreational marijuana issues. Public health modernization and the county opt-out was, we did get a new bill passed 2310 that I think that clarified some questions that we'd had about public health modernization, but the funding just was not there. It's just a fraction of what we were trying to get. So that was the one story of the session where we didn't really get what we wanted. I'm a little bit nervous about OHA will get that money to counties through a competitive grant process. And the idea of a competitive grant process versus a funding formulaic allocation, those are two very different things. The county opt-out works very well in a funding allocation model. Doesn't work at all in a competitive grant situation. So that's something we're going to have to keep our eyes on, is that we were looking for a tool much like Community Corrections Act, where you can hold the legislator's feet to the fire, the legislative assembly's feet to the fire by saying, look, if the assembly doesn't appropriate enough money, we get to opt out. In public health, that's sort of what we were trying to get, but the way the language works, they can allocate the money through a competitive grant program. And that's a little bit different than formulaic.
In which case, we potentially could be completely left out of the allocation.
We could.
Yeah, we could. I hate to say those words.
Yeah. So again, a little bit more there. Funding adequacy for family mediation continues to bite at our heels. This is a real problem for family mediation folks. Interesting dynamic here. These are dollars that come through the OJD, the Judicial Department's budget. A little bit tough for us because the counties that have been impacted, Multnomah, Clackamas, Washington, and Lane, primarily by some changes that were made a couple years ago about judicial funding, are also the counties that are going to that very committee and making sure that we've got courthouse funding. So even the agency's in a bit of a pickle. They had a policy option package to fix this, but they were looking for so much money for these courthouse projects. A little bit tough to walk back up to the dais after making your presentation about courthouse funding and try to get a couple $1 million more for a sort of obscure program. And I don't mean to minimize it by saying obscure program. It's a very important service that we provide, but relatively it was just awkward to, like I said, sit back down in the room and then get back up on this different issue. And it's something we're all dealing with. So last week we did have a conversation with the department about how to best approach this moving forward. It's certainly something that's on their radar screen, and we'll continue to work for it. So I think that's as much as I want to say about the wrap-up. I am working with individual departments, and I've got a couple of different departments that I've already completed documents for about just sort of bill implementation. So things that may or may not have been on our radar screen, but certainly did require some operational changes for departments or things to keep their eyes on. And I'd be working individually with departments to schedule times to go over those kinds of issues with them. So at this point in time, I think I've covered everything.
I'm going to lead off by giving you a personal commendation on the work that you did up there. I witnessed it. I traveled to the legislature several times, only once to testify on the courthouse or any of the items, for that matter, that you have on your list. Most of my testimony was regarding Veterans Affairs, but each time I was there, I saw you mentioned a cold sweat. Well, I saw lots of hot sweats up there, which were developed by you running from one committee meeting to another. So, Mr. Kyler, thank you very much. You set an example that other municipal and county lobbyists should follow. In fact, you are I'll say this out loud, you are a beacon of how to make it happen correctly up there. So thank you very much. Comments? Mr. Rickoff, please.
Very quickly, not taking the prerogative to introduce this topic, I would like to speak to the work we're attempting to do with our legislative affairs. We are really focusing on providing the best service possible to you and to the departments. That as the drivers of the content of the program, it's critical that you be served. With the several thousand bills that work through the legislative session, we need to stay focused, and the report card for Mr. Kyler was relatively short, just a handful of items that we were asking him to really focus on and deliver results on, and he did a superb job of delivering just that. There's a lot of pressure to weigh in on any number of bills as things move fast, and I think the discipline in staying focused will serve us well. This start on the courthouse funding to provide the planning has been a tremendous start. But as we start focusing for the legislative, for the long session coming up in 2019, and what is likely to be a very considerable ask for a courthouse, maintaining that discipline throughout the county has been a critical issue. And I cannot commend Alex enough for staying focused and delivering so successfully on a tight legislative agenda.
And just a brief addition, you mentioned several thousand bills. Knowing which ones are worthy of spending your time on, that takes keen insight and understanding some things are just going to go no place. Commissioner Sorensen and I can testify from the olden days when we were in the legislature that we got paper printouts of every single bill, and it filled dozens of file cabinet drawers, and most of them you dumped at the end of the session. So it's once again, keen insight as to which ones to follow, which ones are worthy of the time. So thank you very much, Mr. Rickoff. Any further comments from Mr. Kyler? Commissioner Bozovich.
Did we need to take any action on the potential priorities for the short session, or is that?
I would contend that not at this time. I think we
have time before the short session.
We do, and we're continuing to gather those priorities from the departments, and we'll come back to you with a firmed up
My plan is to hold another legislative committee meeting before the session starts, and we'll have that. We'll have a comprehensive list.
And we are working on our United Front agenda to make sure that our issues are incisive and once again worthy of our attention when we go back to D.C. in the spring.
Senator Farr, yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kyler. Very well. Then we'll move along. That concludes our regular business and up to Commissioner's business. Do we have any announcements from the Board of Commissioners? Commissioner Bozievich.
Just two quick ones. One, the full Public Safety Coordinating Council met last Thursday afternoon and adopted the budget number 8 that we adopted on Tuesday, and also reported back about their meetings with the folks up at the CJC on the amendments and changes to pretrial and moving stuff around. And very good meeting. Things are moving forward, and I think we've, once again, we'll be able to look back on this last year and just look at what a highly functioning collaborative model that Public Safety Coordinating Council is, and we see it time and time again in Lane County where we've got these groups of agencies that work together towards a common goal, whether it's in the Poverty and Homelessness Board, or it's at the Human Services Commission, or through our coordinated care organization. We just keep modeling that collaboration and trying to be innovative and make best use of resources. So it's something we can be proud of. And I also wanted to note that yesterday, and Commissioner Lycan was with me, we participated in a tour of some forest land and private forest land that was small woodland, family owned, and also a local long-term family-owned farm up in the Junction City area. It was a tour put on by the Extension Service and also the Lane Families for Farms and Forest joint tour. Very interesting tour. Was really interesting to listen to a wildlife biologist talk about the small woodland property and the importance of the different age forests to some of the wildlife, particularly the new young reforestation areas, how important those were for forage for migratory songbirds. And then also to listen to Brian Harper, who is just a great and enthusiastic
rock star
speaker on the behalf of the hazelnut industry here in the South Willamette Valley, and standing there in a hazelnut orchard and learning all about how much work hazelnuts really are, and the importance of some of the care to control worms and other diseases like the European blight that they're concerned about here. And it was just a really great tour, and I want to thank the folks that sponsored that tour and the folks at Extension Service and Lane Families for Farms and Forests for allowing us to come along. It was meant for community leaders, so Senator Beyer was there. There were folks from Springfield School District. I saw folks from Travel Lane County on the tour, and a lot, many folks I didn't recognize because they had about 4 crummies going around from site to site. So,
crummies. It's been a while since I rode in a crummy.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So thanks for that tour, and I actually just shared a video that of the wildlife biologist speaking during that tour on my Facebook page. So if anyone wants to hear about some of the wildlife and small woodland management, it was pretty interesting.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just, I think Commissioner Bozievich stated it really about the tour. It was really interesting. I think the thing I was impressed about it was how many of our family-owned local businesses here have really become so much more automated. I mean, it's really impressive, just the technology involved, whether it's on the wood product side, the farming side. It's really impressive. And I love the answer that Brian Harper gave between if you call them filberts or hazelnuts. And if you want to sell filberts, you'll get 45 cents a pound. If you want to sell hazelnuts, you'll get $1.03 a pound. It was really intriguing, and that's why you'll hear people say, I have a filbert orchard, but that grows hazelnuts. And also that Oregon accounts for 99% of all the hazelnuts in the United States.
And going up.
And going up, which is incredible. And plus, we're 4% of the entire global market. And so, but the thing I was somewhat surprised was to hear that Turkey is the huge producer globally of hazelnuts. And anyway, it was really intriguing, very interesting, but it was well worth the tour. And I was really grateful for those who organized it. It was really a very, very informative. And one other thing I'd like to share real quickly, and I got an email from Douglas County Commissioner Tim Freeman, who's president of the Association of ONC Counties. And there was a motion to change the venue of the potential, what's called the RMP case, to move it from the D.C. Court of Appeals to the Ninth Circuit, and that was denied. So it's going to stay in the D.C. Court of Appeals, which, from the ONC Association's vantage point, that's a much more positive than it be changed to the D.C. Court of Appeals. So we'll find out more, but that was I just received this email just probably about an hour ago, and I just wanted to report that real quickly. And that's really all I have. But the tour yesterday was very, very informative, and I was glad I was able to attend. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lackinen. You know, it's amazing to see how many former grass seed farms are being converted to hazelnut production these days in Oregon.
Oh,
so I expect that 4% is going to grow. That 4% global is going to grow at some point.
Yeah.
Other announcements, Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention on the Oregon Department of Agriculture has been putting out more statistics on the growth of the filbert industry in Oregon, and in particular the conversion of the grassland in the Willamette Valley to filbert production. Also, the role of Oregon in the filbert production in the U.S., in the world filbert market. A few years ago, there was a huge dispute between the Turkish filbert industry and the U.S. filbert industry, of which we are, as mentioned, like half of the U.S. filbert production. And one of the things that interested me as a lawyer was that the parties to this dispute, and again, it kind of exceeds my knowledge of what the dispute was about, but typically disputes are about money, but that the parties to the dispute, which included the Turkish filbert industry and the U.S. filbert industry, and of course Oregon being half of the U.S. filbert industry, they all had to agree on who was going to be, arbitrating this dispute. And apparently it wasn't going to go to some international tribunal, but they had to agree under some kind of arbitration agreement of who would be the arbitrator. And they actually picked Ed Peterson, who was a Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court, retired, and which surprised me because, they needed somebody who knew about the filbert industry, but they didn't want to have somebody that was going to be favoring one side or the other. I don't know the outcome, but obviously the U.S. and Turkish filbert industries are going strong. Ours is expanding, so at any rate, small world department.
Excellent. Further announcements? Seeing none, I'm going to move just very briefly. I mentioned that I would talk about the process for the performance auditor. And last week, we did have a meeting of the Performance Audit Committee, at which point the Marcia Edwards and Laura Vinson made a presentation regarding the process of recruiting for a performance auditor. We continue with the process. We're expanding our horizons as far as the announcement. And additionally, I'll mention that Trish Burnett, who is the performance auditor for the University of Oregon, sits on that committee and put forward a number of recruitment agencies who are specific to performance auditors. So I'm looking forward to our moving forward regarding the performance audit committee. Things are moving in the right direction. It seems slow, but you know, we are looking to replace a very high-performing performance auditor, and the fact is we are looking to make certain that we have the right fit for the job, because waiting a month or 2 months for a performance auditor is far more desirable than putting the wrong person in the job, which could last for years, take years to rectify. So I'm pretty happy with the process that we're going through. And if you do have any further questions, you can refer them to Laura Vinson, to Mr. Rickoff, or I can try to answer the questions myself. Let's see. The other thing I'll mention is that Commissioner Bozievich, thank you for chairing the board meeting last Wednesday surrounding the Justice Reinvestment Grant and a couple of other items. I spent that day in Clackamas County. I'd been invited to sit on a panel in Clackamas County that I found very interesting. I was there with Mark Jolin and Gary Rudman. Mark Jolin and Gary Rudman work with Multnomah County and Portland, the city of Portland, regarding housing, regarding innovative ways to produce housing, new housing, affordable housing. And it was pretty interesting to me because I was sitting there with two very high-level officials from large jurisdictions talking about housing, and they were acquiescing that some of the things that we are doing here in Lane County are innovative and really cutting edge. And in fact, there were at least 6 mayors in the audience and a double handful of city councilors from the different cities in Clackamas County. Clackamas is a county that has a lot of medium-sized cities, no very large cities. You know, a lot of 12 to 22,000 population cities, and so the questions were primarily aimed at me, because the people in Clackamas County view themselves as being more like Lane County than like Multnomah County or like the city of Portland, even though we do have different issues that we deal with. You know, they are adjacent to a very large metropolitan area. And we actually have a fairly significantly sized metropolitan area, but nothing as large as the ones that the metropolitan area that affects the way they work on homelessness issues. So it was a great day, and I had a chance to photograph a development that's beginning right adjacent to the administrative building in Clackamas County, right there in Oregon City. Right across there's a parking lot that's being converted to a transitional housing project, very similar, in fact, very, very similar indeed to Opportunity Village. And they've taken some of the cues from Opportunity Village. They have one of the houses has already been built, piles and piles of materials to build the other houses, and they're all pretty excited. Every single Clackamas County commissioner was there, and they were all very excited about moving forward with finding ways to make sure that people have dignified, safe, secure, and sanitary housing. So Clackamas County is moving forward, and once again, Commissioner Bozievich, thank you for chairing the meeting and allowing me to attend the Clackamas County meeting. So with that, we'll move along to agenda team requests. Any agenda team requests beyond one that we already have? I see none. And then let's see. I think we'll review assignments following our afternoon session.
Yes, sir.
And any other business for this morning's agenda?
Chair Farr, no, I don't have anything else. Although I would like to state that I share your confidence in our ability to find the right auditor, and I think it's priced right. You know, we've got the right salary and benefits, and we just need to be diligent in that outreach. But I do share your confidence. Thank you. And
I'm going to apologize, because as I was talking about 2 important items, the performance auditor in Clackamas County's response to homelessness, I looked like I was shuffling papers. I couldn't find my language for the executive session, but I found it. So we can go into executive session. But in a few moments, I'm going to sound the gavel, which will place us into executive session. But prior to that, I'll note that at the sound of my gavel, I will also be removing myself from participation in the discussion that's going to occur in the executive session to avoid a conflict of interest. So at the sound of my gavel, we will go into executive session, which will take place in the BCC the Board of Commissioners conference room upstairs, subsequent to which we may come into regular session. If we don't, we'll be in regular session at 1:30 in Harris Hall for our afternoon agenda. At this point, I'm going to read us into executive session. The Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 1926602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed above. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back into public session should the need arise. And a reminder, I will not be chairing the meeting during the executive session. The chair will be Vice Chair Bozovich.